Chapter 1. The Night That Should Have Been Nothing. It was late in 2024 when an ordinary night in Odd, West Virginia suddenly became the moment people would say changed everything for Larry Whittaker. There was no dramatic plan, no criminal career unfolding. There was just an old truck, an empty fuel gauge, and a man in his late 60s stuck on a dark country road with a family member miles away from town and help. Larry was born in 1956, one of the Whittaker siblings who grew up in that same Appalachian hollow, surrounded by the same dirt roads and the same mountains his whole life. For decades, he was unknown outside Raleigh County. That changed when filmmaker Mark Leda began documenting the family in his Soft White Underbelly series, and millions of strangers discovered the Whittakers online. Overnight, Larry and his relatives went from private, rural lives to being labeled as America's most inbred family, discussed, judged, and dissected by people who had never set foot in Odd. But on this particular night, there were no documentary cameras, no interviews, no internet. There was just a problem. The truck ran out of gas. They had no money on hand, no nearby gas station open, and no easy way to get home. Odd is a tiny place with very little around it. When you are poor and isolated, even something as simple as an empty tank can turn into a crisis. The decision that followed was wrong in the eyes of the law, but painfully human. Instead of leaving the truck or calling for help they didn't really have, they chose to take gasoline from someone else's property without permission. That choice, made in minutes, would lead to an arrest, a mugshot, and headlines all around the world. And yet, the real story of that night is smaller and sadder than the internet made it seem. An act of desperation by a man who had never before been in serious trouble, in a family already stretched to the breaking point. Chapter 2. Before the blue lights, the storm around Larry. To understand why that gas mattered so much, you have to understand what Larry was living through before the police ever got involved. Odd, West Virginia, is not a place of opportunities. It's a scattered hamlet in the mountains with a small post office, a church, and a handful of homes lining narrow, winding roads. For generations, the Whittakers lived there largely unseen by the outside world. That changed around 2020, when Mark Leda's videos introduced them to millions. The family's history of close relative marriages and visible disabilities made them a viral curiosity. Some viewers sent donations and compassion. Others sent ridicule. The attention brought some improvements to their daily lives. Money from viewers went toward food, home repairs, and basic necessities the family had struggled to afford for years. But it also brought pressure, confusion, and people trying to use the family's name and story for money. The Whittakers' poverty did not vanish with fame. It became something the whole world could see. In March 2024, things took a darker turn. A video appeared online announcing that Larry had died of a heart attack. It was titled "The Death of Larry Whittaker," and many believed it. Viewers mourned. Donations came in for funeral costs. Even Leda, the man who had filmed the family, reportedly contributed around $1,000, believing he was helping them bury Larry. But Larry wasn't dead. According to documented reports, the hoax was orchestrated by his daughter, known as BJ, who later admitted what she had done and apologized. It was a painful sign of how far desperation over money had pushed the family. By the time the truck rolled to a stop with an empty tank later that same year, Larry had already been killed online once. His name had already been used in a fake funeral, his image already tied to lies he did not control. He was an elderly man in an isolated place, under the weight of poverty, global attention, and family chaos. That is the world he was standing in when he decided to take a few dollars worth of gas. Chapter 3. The gas can, the camera, and 10 hours in jail. On that night in late 2024, stranded without fuel, Larry and a close female relative looked for a way out. Different reports name this relative as BJ or Lorraine, but they agree on what happened next. She walked into a nearby yard that did not belong to them and took gasoline without permission. A surveillance camera captured her on video. She returned to the truck, and Larry poured the stolen gas into the tank so he could get the vehicle running again. To them, it was a fast way to get home, a shortcut to escape the cold and the dark. Legally, it was petty theft. Later, the homeowner reviewed the security footage, saw someone come onto the property and take fuel, and reported it to authorities. With clear video evidence, deputies from Raleigh County identified the family and focused on Larry as the responsible adult. Although his daughter or relative was the one visible on camera, the charges were filed against Larry, not her. This was Larry's first arrest. He was in his late 60s. Deputies transported him to the Southern Regional Jail in Beaver, West Virginia, and booked him on misdemeanor charges related to the theft. The offense was small in legal terms, petty larceny or a similar low-level crime, but the experience was enormous for him. Records and reconstructions agree that Larry spent about 10 hours in custody. Those hours were not part of a long sentence. They were the standard procedures of a minor arrest, being photographed, fingerprinted, processed, and then held until someone could secure his release. For Larry, who had spent his life far from jails and courts, those 10 hours felt like a long, humiliating ordeal. He was suddenly not just the man from that documentary, but a man in a cell. He did not stay there alone. However exactly it was arranged, the key fact is clear: Larry did not escape. He was legally released the same day, after roughly 10 hours behind bars. By the end of the night, Larry was back in Odd. Legally, the case was small, the kind of misdemeanor that usually passes quietly. But because of who he was and how many people already knew his face, the story of those 10 hours was never going to stay small. Chapter 4. Myths, Damage, and What This Night Really Changed. Once word spread that Larry had been arrested over stolen gas, the story left Odd and entered the wider world. Tabloid-style outlets framed it in the harshest possible way. The father from America's most inbred family, jailed for stealing fuel. A minor, need-driven crime became a symbol, used to confirm what some people already wanted to believe about the Whittakers. Very quickly, the truth was mixed with something far more dangerous: identity confusion. A forensic review of the case shows that people online began to blend Larry's small misdemeanor with the histories of entirely different men who happened to share his name. One, Larry Whittaker, documented in federal records, was convicted in the early 1990s for assault with intent to commit murder after repeatedly stabbing another inmate at Lorton Reformatory in Virginia. Another man, Larry Dale Whitaker, in the Michigan prison system, had a record that included an actual prison escape in 1978, a manslaughter conviction in 1979, and a later conviction for operating a methamphetamine lab. These are violent, life-altering felonies, but they belong to different people in different states, not to Larry from Odd, West Virginia. The real Larry's official record, as far as documented, shows a single minor offense: taking petrol from a yard in 2024, being held for about 10 hours, and being released lawfully the same day with the help of family. He did not escape from prison. He did not stab anyone. He did not run a meth lab. When people ask, how did he escape? The honest answer is, he didn't. The escape story belongs to a Michigan offender with a similar name, not to this man in the hills of West Virginia. Meanwhile, other problems swirled around the Whittaker name. After the fake funeral hoax and the gas incident, authorities began looking more closely at the money flowing around the family. In 2025, the West Virginia State Police opened a fraud investigation into individuals who were allegedly soliciting donations for the Whittakers and then failing to pass everything on to them. Two men, Lawrence Eric Carroll and John Patrick Rourke, were named in that probe, which showed just how vulnerable the family had become to exploitation. There were also reports that some of the most vulnerable relatives were moved out of odd for their safety or care, and that neighbors grew more protective, watching the road and working to shield the family from strangers who drove in to stare or film. Mark Leta himself publicly asked viewers not to visit or harass them in person, reminding the world that they are people, not a tourist attraction. So did this stolen gas night change everything? Legally, it was a small case. But symbolically, it marked a turning point. It was the first time law enforcement truly stepped into the Whittakers' story. It exposed how quickly the internet could turn a poor man's worst night into evidence of crimes he never committed. And it showed how fame, poverty, and confusion over a common name can combine into a heavy burden for someone who never asked to be known. Today, Larry is back in odd, living as quietly as he can. The stolen gas incident has become part of his family's lore, a cautionary tale about desperation, about how a single bad decision can echo far beyond its size when the whole world is watching. He is not a monster, not a myth, not the violent figure some headlines suggested. He is an aging man from the mountains who made a mistake and paid for it with fear, shame, and misunderstanding. As a channel that cares about the Whittakers, we tell this story not to mock, but to correct. To separate Larry from the crimes of other men. To put the stolen gas night back in its real scale. A small crime in the shadow of a much bigger struggle. And to remind everyone watching that when we talk about the Whittakers, we are not talking about characters in a show. We are talking about a real family, living with the consequences of things done to them, and of one night when a few dollars of gas cost far more than anyone expected.